this month, if you've been following us online or here on campus, you know that we are, as we often do in January, focusing on the basic principles, the basic ideas and concepts that are the foundation for science of mind, a faith, a philosophy, and a way of life. And Dr. Petra has been, in the first couple of weeks, really introducing what is this idea of science of mind, and we're playing with science of consciousness. Like, oh, what if we started taking it in? Like, this is the science of consciousness and how it works in our lives and how we can apply it in order to have a life that is most fulfilling. And what are the 10 principles that we teach in science of mind? And how do we talk about and think about the practices that allow us to actually not just know the principles, but integrate them into our lives? And when we look at the principles, what are some of the methods that we can use that allow us, or that really prepare us to go even deeper? And so all of that really is a focus in the month of January on education. Educating ourselves about who we are and what that means. So we've already talked about several of the principles and practices, and I'm going to remind you of those. But I want you, especially if this is your first time engaging in this conversation this month, I want to make sure that we are on the same page. Now, some of you are like, Dr. Petra already reminded us what a principle is. And others of you are like, I took your universal spiritual principles and practices class, Tracy. I know what a practice is. But we want to make sure everybody is working from the same definition, and that it's the foundation for everything that you begin to take in during the remainder of our time together today. So the CSL definition of principle that we are using in all of our courses now is this one. And if you are able to see this clearly, I invite you to read it out loud along with me, because you will have another impression of it. So a CSL definition of principle is a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as the foundation for a system of belief or behavior, or for a chain of reasoning. Take a deep breath. So we're not just using the word principle like in theory or just kind of flippantly. We understand when we say the word principle that it's a fundamental truth or proposition. It's not an opinion. It's not going to be different for Joe than it is for me or than it is for Kathy. It is a fundamental truth, and it serves as the foundation for our beliefs. And a practice is this, and yes, please read it with me: the actual application or use of an idea or belief, as opposed to, it's not just a theory, it is the application of that theory. It is seeing how that theory is demonstrating in your life or in the world we live in. And so the practice is something that we do to make it real, or to make it relevant, to make it apply to our own understanding of the world. So you've got principles and you've got practices, and our practices are not one-on-one connected to each principle. So it is not that, oh, the principle is a oneness and the one practice you do is meditate. No. So practices can be attached to different principles. You could have the same practice, and it might apply, or you might be using it to apply 3 or 4 of the different principles. So when we talk about practices, to help that make sense for us, we also say that our practices are methods, so that we use them in a methodical way. And so again, I invite you to read with me. A definition of a method is a systematic procedure, technique, or mode applied to practice principles. Okay, you got it? Oh, this is not encouraging. Well, you're going to hear it again next week, because that's our commitment this month, to define principle and practice and method, so that for the rest of the year you have better clarity about what you're knowing and then what you are doing. So we are going to focus on how do we use all these things, but I was taking notes the last couple of weeks and checking off which are the principles and practices that Dr. Petra has already encouraged us to know about and to begin to use. So we've already talked about love, the principle of love, the principle of creation, the principle of the threefold nature of universal intelligence. We've talked about the creative process and a little bit of an introduction into spiritual laws, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more today. And the practices spent in the first 2 weeks of the month talking about practicing the presence, and using methods in order to practice the presence, methods like meditation, a method of being mindful or mindfulness. We also have done a little bit. Last week, Petra made some very powerful and important comments about sacred study, and how as a practice, sacred study is really foundational to our growth and our learning and our then being able to apply, because we have studied what it means and then we are able to apply it in our lives. And some examples of sacred study, of course, would be reading, or would be taking a class, discussing the sacred writing in your prayer group or in your sangha, those kinds of things where you're taking the information, but you're really studying it, not just hearing someone on Sunday talk about it from the platform. So how do we use these principles and these practices? I'm going to spend a big chunk of my time with you today on one particular practice, and that's spiritual mind treatment, but in the context of the principle, which is the principle of the spiritual laws working, like the spiritual law is always working, but how then do we use it? So let me get my hands free. Spiritual mind treatment. So if you're online, put a me or a hand in the chat. If you're in the room, I'm just going to invite you to stand up. Have you ever taken a class to learn how to do or to understand what spiritual mind treatment is? Please stand if you're in the room. Please indicate in chat. So about a little more than half, maybe 60% of the people in the room, you may be seated. I'm not going to call on you. I'm not going to say, oh, what are the 5 steps of treatment? And, oh, when was that time you took that class and you don't remember? So a spiritual mind treatment, it's the single most important practice in science of mind. A lot of times what we share with folks is that, Ernest Holmes himself said He didn't create anything new. He synthesized, after studying all of the major religious and spiritual paths, he synthesized what is the common message that the mystics from all the traditions keep going to or go back to again and again. And so we often will say science of mind is a synthesis. It's not new information. It's a synthesis of the common understanding of the truth of life and how the universe works from a mystical philosophical point of view. But the one thing, or one of the things that is very unique about science of mind is this idea of spiritual mind treatment. Is there anyone in the room or online who has gone to the doctor in the last 6 months and received treatment for your health? Yes, you could raise your hand. You could say yes out loud. We are not a silence congregation. So when we talk about spiritual mind treatment, we are saying that we can use our mind, our capital M mind, our spiritual mind, to treat conditions that we are experiencing in our human world. Not just physical conditions, but mental and emotional conditions as well. Spiritual mind treatment is a process of applying principle to whatever is going on and or whatever it is you want to create in your life. It is a treatment for a condition that you want to change. Please listen to the next thing I am going to say. Conditions do not have to be bad or broken for you to want to change them. I have a great life. I want to have an even better life. That means I want the condition to change from good to great, from great to greater, from greater to best possible. So please don't confuse the word condition with broken. I went to a doctor's appointment December 22nd, and I was feeling fine. It was a checkup, and the doctor recommended some treatments for wellness and for my best health to represent itself. I did not go to the doctor because I had pain, injury, illness, disease. Well, okay, maybe I have disease, but I don't know, right? But I'm not in the hospital. That is not the only time you go to your doctor. When things are not working, if you have a great doctor and if you're focused on health. I go to my chiropractor. I go to my acupuncturist for a treatment. And maybe I have a little pain in my shoulder. I'm like, hey, can y'all help me out? Like, make this pain go away, because we have chiropractors in the room. But can you make this pain go away? Because I don't want it to be a bigger pain. I don't want to be disabled by it in a way that I can't work or I can't enjoy my life. So I have to say all of that because so often people in classes will be like, oh, well, I didn't ask for a spiritual mind treatment because, it wasn't that bad. Or I didn't ask for a spiritual mind treatment. I mean, my life's going okay. No, when you understand why this is our practice, then you understand that science of mind is actually, we are part of a healing order because we know that spiritual mind treatment reveals the truth, and that means our life begins to look like it is healed. Okay, so that's like my lecture. I'm really not supposed to be talking about that. But every time I say spiritual mind treatment, it's like, wait, give it some context because I want you to understand. The second paragraph, or the third paragraph on the slide reads, spiritual mind treatment uses the creative process to direct spiritual laws to heal or change conditions. This is what is happening. So if you go to a practitioner or spiritual coach in our community and you ask for prayer, the type of prayer we do is affirmative prayer using the form of spiritual mind treatment. It is the most important practice that we have in science of mind. One more question for you. Is there anyone who has received a spiritual mind treatment from someone else or has done their own spiritual mind treatment and you actually experienced a change in the condition? TSRW, yes. Okay, so in some ways I'm preaching to the choir. Many of you raised your hands and you know that it works. For those of you who did not raise your hand, I cannot emphasize enough that if you really want to see spiritual mind treatment work, if you want to see these principles that we are talking about work in your life, either learn to do spiritual mind treatment or every Sunday online or in person after service, have a practitioner or spiritual coach do prayer with you so that you can feel the universe shift and open the door for what you want to happen. So the principle of, or the practice of spiritual mind treatment is the main one that I want to focus on today because it is so critical that you understand it and that you use it so that it can work in your life. Spiritual mind treatments, it's an act, it's an art, it's a science, it's all of those. Just like when we say science of mind is a faith, a philosophy, and a way of life, it's all three of those. A spiritual mind treatment, it is an act, it's something we do. There is an art to it of matching the right spiritual principles that will help to lead you to the healing or the change of condition that you are requesting. And there is a science to it. There is a process to it that it gives us the form that actually is what helps it work, because it helps us get out of the way and align with universal spiritual principle in all of its forms. And what is it showing us in terms of like another way to talk about it? Spiritual mind treatment is intentional manifestation. Now, I'm not calling any names, but I know there are some people within the sound of my voice who are all over the law of attraction. I believe in the law of attraction. It is a law. It is a spiritual law, and it works. And if you are all into the law of attraction and you believe or you think that all you have to do is say, you'll recognize this reference. All you have to do is say, I want a red bike. 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 I'm not saying that you'll never, ever get a red bike. I'm saying that if you decide you want a red bike and you use intentional manifestation, you will put the law of attraction to work for you in a more powerful way and get the results that you are desiring faster and in a way that you can recognize. Because intentional manifestation is not wishing. Intentional manifestation is not dreaming. Intentional manifestation is not begging. Intentional manifestation is consciously producing a definite outcome by using spiritual principle to bring about a greater good, a more abundant life, whatever it is that you want for yourself and for the world. And in Science of Mind and Centers for Spiritual Living, we are all about intentional manifestation, because you are the person who is responsible for what you create from whatever opportunities are available to you. You are the person who gets to decide. And it's not magic. So intentional manifestation is both a concept but also a practice that spiritual mind treatment is an example of. So there are different methods for intentional manifestation. Spiritual mind treatment, which I have gone on and on about, and there will be a quiz after. But there are also other practices that are related to intentional manifestation. So affirmations, affirming what you want and bringing in the emotional feeling of how happy you will be, or how effective it is, or how wonderful it is when that happens, whatever that you are affirming. That is a method related to intentional manifestation. Visualization, not visioning. Visualization. So some of you came and hung out with Ryan on December 30th when Ryan Brown facilitated making a vision board in a very creative way. Or throughout the year, there are different times where we host events where you can come in and create a vision board or a treasure map. Some of you may call it that, where you are visualizing and you have images and sometimes words, but images that really connect with what the life you want to create. Whether that's in your relationships or your career or your family life, or in just the experience you have of joy and peace. Whether that's visualizing world peace and a world where people are actually respectful to one another, and that we replace racism with relationships that work cross-culturally. You can visualize that, and that would be intentional manifestation. You are intentionally directing the course and the direction of the universe in order to deliver that which is important to you. Also, a method under the umbrella of intentional manifestation is giving and receiving. Some of you want to manifest a CSLDallas community where we are financially able to provide programming to you and services to you that help you integrate all of what we talk about on Sundays, or all of what we experience on Sunday evening or Wednesday evening with meditation. And you give financially to support that. You give of your time. I look around the room and see people who are volunteering as greeters and ushers today, and people who volunteer in hospitality, and people who have volunteered to make our theater ministry magical. And all of that is intentional manifestation. Does that make sense to you? It's not just, not just hanging out. It is hanging out, but with an intention in mind, in order to manifest a healthy community called CSLDallas. So today, you've got another set of practices or methods that reflect the practice of intentional manifestation. I'm taking a breath because I remember, there have been times in the month of January where we are investing in review of all the basics. And there are some years for me when I'm like, I have heard these basics again and again and again. And just about the moment where I'm ready to check out, like, I know this stuff already, or I've heard this stuff so many times. I've taken 6 classes. And then it hits me. This question comes to mind to me, and I'm going to ask you to ask yourself this question. If this feels like a review, if this feels like something you already know, are you able to explain it to someone else? Could I tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, Dr. Petra is in Costa Rica, and my throat is about to give out on me. I have a little touch, it's like laryngitis. Would you come and do the Sunday morning class? And all I want you to do is explain 2 of the principles and 2 of the practices. Thank you, Linda. There are people in the room saying, I'm thinking it, but she said it. I don't ask you that to make you feel bad or to put you on the spot. I am inviting you to ask yourself that question because until we can explain it to someone else in a way that they can understand it, we may not know it as well as we think we do. Now, it is most important that we're able to explain it to ourselves and incorporate it into our own lives, because maybe you, like me, are like, well, I maybe can't say the words, but if they watch how I live, the way I live would be an example of that principle. And then I could tell stories, or I could say, this is what happened to me, and this is how I know this principle is true. And that's really good as well. But the bottom line is, this is not just theory. It's not. And if you only engage in the theory, you're doing yourself a disservice. It's not too hard for you to understand. It's not too complex for you to begin to integrate it into your life. All you have to do is be open to it and pick 1 or 2 things to practice. You can't practice everything at once. So when you practice one thing for a while, one spiritual practice, or you practice studying, which was last week, but studying one principle for 3 months or for a year, and you get that, it's like they're all connected. And if you understand one, you'll understand the others. So I'm just going to highlight a couple more just so that it begins to soak in your brain. And I am going to ask you to choose one thing from today to take into your week. So it might be spiritual mind treatment, or it might be the idea of intentional manifestation, or it might be one of those examples of intentional manifestation. Choose what works for you, but I'm going to add a couple more for you to choose from. And I am warning you, I'm actually going to ask for 3 or 4 people to tell me what you're going to take into your week. And I don't want it to be our practitioners who really know this stuff and have a vow to practice it. And if you're online, same thing. I'm going to ask the question in a little bit, and I want you to put in the chat, what one thing are you going to practice or take up this week? So self-awareness. Self-awareness is the foundation for conscious choice. It's the practice that illuminates our alignment with each of the principles. So it actually is one of our practices to commit to self-awareness. Now, here's a great example of what I explained earlier. All of our practices have many different methods under them. So, self-awareness, you may be practicing self-awareness using a method of silence. You might schedule a time to meet with one of our spiritual coaches so that you are able to increase your self-awareness about how you are or are not applying the principles in your life. And there are many other ways, but the goal is to practice self-awareness. Again, this is an example where your methods may overlap different practices and different principles. Because for some of you, when you practice self-awareness, you may do that through mindfulness, right? A mindfulness practice, so where you are observing yourself and becoming more aware of where you are using the principles and where you are not. So we're adding self-awareness to the list. Anybody love this little girl the way I do? She's just so precious. We have to make it real in our lives. When we are very young, we're constantly exploring. We can look at a leaf and be fascinated by it. We can watch what's going on in the yard or the cars going down the street, or we look up at our big brother or big sister, or we look at the adults in our lives and it's like, oh, what is that? Oh, how do I learn to do that? Oh, I want to learn to do that and I'm going to practice it. To make it real, you have to do something. You can't just hear Dr. Tracy Brown on Sunday morning and go, yeah, Tracy gave me something to think about. Okay, you can do that, but you won't be making it real, right? Don't make it about me. Don't make it about Dr. Petra. Make these principles and these practices come alive in your life. And then the last one I'm going to hit on just briefly today, and Dr. Petra will build on it a little bit more next week, is the practice of gratitude. I feel like I can spend the least amount of time on the practice of gratitude because so many of you already practice gratitude. You make gratitude lists, you have a gratitude journal, you subscribe to the Oprah Winfrey method of experiencing and documenting gratitude. We know to be grateful. And it's easy for most of us to say, oh, I'm grateful for this and that. I'm grateful the sun came up this morning. I'm grateful to celebrate Ernest Holmes' birthday today because he wrote a great book. I'm grateful. But then we forget this last paragraph on the slide. Gratitude accepts with perfect faith that which has not yet manifested, as if it were already here. When I get up in the morning, when I wake up in the morning, almost every morning I say, it's a good day. I'm grateful to be alive, to have the opportunity to experience whatever humanity is going to lay before me. Whatever it is. And sometimes I don't like the individual thing, but I'm grateful because I operate in perfect faith that my good is unfolding. And I get busy redefining what my good looks like and feels like and claim it with gratitude that this change in condition is already complete in universal mind. Now, if you're paying attention and you heard what I just said, then you know that I just went right back to spiritual mind treatment. I claim my good and know that it is already complete, and that is why I can be grateful, because these principles work all the time. So you can use journaling for gratitude. You can use journaling for self-awareness. You can use journaling for so many of the practices in order to experience the principles. My desire, I'll take out all those other words, those parental words, those teacher words, those judgment words. I'll take all of those out, and I'll just stand in what I desire for you. I desire for you that you will choose a principle, or you will choose a practice, and you will choose a method that allows you to live a life you love. So yes, on the count of 3, just yell out, what is it that you are going to take from these ideas today? And really this week, just this week, 1 week, what will you take up? 1, 2, 3. Again? Okay, I'm hearing affirmations, I'm hearing treatment, I heard, give me some others. I heard gratitude, awareness, self-awareness, intentional manifestation. I thought I could hear, but you all really spoke in unison. I don't know that. That is not a common thing in this community. Usually it's pop up, pop up, pop up, pop up, but it was all at once. Any that I didn't hear? Spiritual principles, and looking at all of the spiritual principles and see how you can apply them. This is where we're going. And guess what? We're going there together. We're doing it together. That's why we have spiritual community. That's why we celebrate on Sundays, that we are learning together and using these principles together. I wish for you the most amazing week you could possibly have, and I hope that you will be with us next Sunday as we close out the principles and the practices that are the foundation for Science of Mind and Centers for Spiritual Living.